I'm pregnant. We're finally having our child. Ever since we got married, we both wanted children, and with my dreams finally coming true, I excitedly broke the news to my husband, Bob. I had expected Bob to be overjoyed, given all the struggles we'd been through, but his reaction was far from what I'd anticipated. It felt like I had been pushed off a cliff. My name is Catherine, 40 years old. I was confessed to by Bob and we got married when I was 30. I always admired the idea of marriage and dreamt of building a happy family one day. I had this vision of a life surrounded by a loving husband and children, full of smiles. However, due to my serious nature, I was hesitant to get into a relationship, and before I knew it, my 20s were almost over, and I felt increasingly anxious. I also have two sisters, both of whom were already married by the time Bob confessed his feelings to me, which made me feel even more pressured. So, I quickly responded to Bob's confession, and we started dating. We worked at the same place, and I had interacted and worked with Bob before. So, I had a pretty good idea of his personality and felt positive about him, which made it easy for me to give an affirmative answer. Though we dated for only a year, I was drawn to his cheerful and easygoing nature, something I lacked. I believed that we could complement each other well as life partners. It seemed Bob felt the same way, as we quickly decided to tie the knot. You know, I tend to be overly optimistic. I believe we need someone serious like you, Catherine. I think with you, we could have a stable life and make a great couple. I had always been somewhat self-conscious about my serious nature, so hearing these words from Bob meant a lot to me. While we weren't madly in love, I could say with confidence that there was love between us, and I believed we could have a happy married life. After getting married, we both worked. We were already in our 30s, and considering our future, we decided we wanted children soon. Both of us held senior positions, so our salaries were quite high. We always hoped for 2 children, eagerly anticipating the day they would come into our lives. So, until that happened, we decided to work hard, ensuring we could provide for our future family. But even after 2 years of marriage, I wasn't pregnant. In the first year, we laughed off the disappointment, reminding ourselves that having a child is a blessing that cannot be forced. We've only been married for a year. Let's not rush things, Bob would joke, lifting my spirits whenever I felt down. So, at that time, I believed it would happen soon, and I looked forward to it without anxiety. However, by the second year, the reality that I still wasn't pregnant began to weigh on us. Bob, too, started looking somber, having assumed that by now, we would naturally have a child. Our shared anxieties led to disagreements, and we even had heated arguments about it. Considering our age, it seemed concerning that we hadn't conceived yet. Bob suggested we get checked out at a hospital. Once we cooled off from our argument, I agreed, thinking it was a constructive approach. We both went to the hospital for tests, which revealed there were no health issues. It was a relief since I had been worried about potential fertility issues. The doctor suggested it was just a matter of timing, so we continued our efforts, following any advice and directions provided. Despite our efforts, the tensions increased, and our arguments became more frequent. Our interaction at home became minimal. Our life was a far cry from the happy, smile-filled home I had envisioned when we first got married, but I refused to give up. I believed that once we had a child, the life I had imagined would become a reality. And finally, 10 years into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. Both my sisters already had children, and while I had been envious of them for so long, now I too was expecting. The moment I heard the test results, overwhelmed with joy and the realization of a long-held dream, I broke down in tears. For the longest time, not being able to conceive had been a source of sadness, but now I felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. While initially we had wanted 2 children, at this point, I was content with even 1. As long as the baby was born healthy, that's all that mattered. I lovingly caressed my belly, wishing for a healthy child. After leaving the hospital, filled with happiness, I couldn't help but grin as I immediately called Bob to share the news. However, it seemed he was at work, as he quickly and rather curtly ended the call. Certainly, I felt guilty for calling during work hours and realized I was too excited. So, I decided to tell my husband about the pregnancy once he got home and settled down. I went for a checkup today and found out I'm pregnant. We're finally gonna have a baby. I intended to report it calmly, but my happiness overflowed, and I told him excitedly. Having wanted a child for 10 years and finally being pregnant, I thought he would be thrilled. However, his reaction wasn't what I expected. Really? Now? At our age? He seemed irritated, adding, "Do you even realize how old you are? You're 40, right? There are risks with having a child at this age." The doctor had mentioned this, but I was assured that with proper precautions, everything would be fine. Indeed, having my first child at an older age is challenging, but I was prepared for it. I had made up my mind to have this baby. Upon sharing my feelings, my husband only seemed more upset, saying, "Raising a kid at 40? And we don't even know if the baby will be born without any health issues. It might have disabilities." My husband said that with advanced maternal age, only children with issues are born, and he definitely didn't want to deal with caregiving. He argued that he wants care in his old age, but doesn't want to be burdened with taking care of a child with special needs. It felt like he saw our child as just a convenient tool. "It's your child too, you know? How can you say such things? After all we've been through, we're finally blessed. Aren't you happy?" Upset, I responded that I would cherish our child, regardless of any potential disabilities. In his anger, he blamed me for the delayed pregnancy and even suggested we divorce. "That's it. Let's get a divorce." At first, I didn't quite understand what my husband said and instinctively asked him to repeat it. Why would I receive such a comment upon sharing the joyful news of my pregnancy? "What do you mean?" Then, he began to say that he was fed up with life with me, now a 40-year-old woman. He felt the pregnancy was late, I always seemed down, and while he thought my seriousness made me suitable for marriage, he now realized he was wrong. I felt hurt by my husband's harsh words, but some of his comments oddly made sense to me. Initially, I was drawn to his cheerful and easygoing nature, but over the last 10 years, I had begun to notice issues with his character. Still, I had planned to continue life with him and pretended not to notice these flaws, but now I realized it was impossible. He tends to take things too lightly, and instead of being cheerful, he's rather frivolous. We had quarreled over things other than the child, and our marital relationship had cooled. Over the past decade, I felt that we somehow had mismatched values, and this incident solidified my realization. I wanted a child, so I endured our differences, but now I think it's enough. I'd rather not have a father who doesn't cherish his child. So, I agreed when he said he would definitely get a divorce. And a week after the pregnancy was confirmed, our divorce was finalized. During this time, my husband demanded alimony, saying I had wasted 10 years of his life, but legally, there wasn't a reason to pay him. In fact, I responded that if anything, I should receive alimony. He seemed to give up on that idea. However, next, he refused to pay child support. At first, thinking of the child, I wanted him to contribute, but he was so stubborn about it, I got fed up. I wanted to separate from him as soon as possible. I decided to forego child support on the condition that he would never see the child. As for our assets, we both worked and split the monthly expenses equally, and since we rented our home, there was no property division. So, I could take all of my savings. He had spent a considerable amount on his hobbies, so had there been property division, I would have likely lost out. I had never told him how much I saved, so he quickly agreed to no property division. I had been prudent with my savings, and I felt secure knowing they would last about 5 years even if I couldn't work. After the divorce and packing my things, I immediately returned to my parents' home in Nebraska. Both parents were there, both in their 80s but still in good health. My parents warmly welcomed me back and were very happy about my pregnancy. Perhaps I had been hurt by my ex-husband not being pleased about the pregnancy. Seeing my parents happily welcome the news, I finally felt relieved. And I was determined to raise this child safely. My child was born without complications, even though I had been concerned about giving birth at an older age. A healthy boy without any disabilities, and my siblings, who already had families of their own, cared for him as well. With my parents' support, raising the child went smoothly. I named my son John. Moving back to my parents, away from my previous job, I had quit, and with my severance and parents' support, I could focus on raising John until he was about a year old. Later, I found a new job. Although I spent less time at home, I dedicated all my free time to John. I was busy and often tired, but John's smiles always rejuvenated me. He was a bit introverted and quiet, but he loved when I read storybooks to him. He seemed to enjoy studying even at a young age, and when I gave him a workbook at age 5, he started learning letters with enthusiasm, looking forward to starting elementary school. He seemed to inherit my seriousness, and I worried he might not make friends if he focused too much on studies. But he joyfully went to school and played with friends after classes. John wasn't very athletic initially, but in middle school, he developed a dream for his future and changed significantly. He worked hard to overcome his weaknesses and became even more passionate about his studies. I was concerned about his intense focus, but over time, he improved physically and even joined a sports team in high school, eventually winning awards in competitions. Seeing him, once so unathletic, shine in competitions made me so proud. In college, he excelled in both academics and sports and became more sociable, enjoying time with his friends. He seemed to be a well-rounded individual, both personally and capability-wise, so much so that I felt there was little for me to worry about. Still, I always keep an eye out, ready to support and protect John if needed, but for now, it doesn't seem necessary. Finally, my son got the job he always wanted and moved out, but we keep in touch regularly. Sometimes he visits with gifts and helps around the house, and he's always considerate of me. He's truly a wonderful son. Even though I wasn't the best father, he's grown up to be such a remarkable young man, and I couldn't be prouder. After 25 years since the divorce, I've turned 65 and retired. I worked hard so that I wouldn't be a burden on my son in my later years. Even though I've retired, I'm still energetic and plan to keep working. When I told my son this, he wanted to properly celebrate my retirement and upcoming birthday, suggesting we go out for a meal. But I know he's busy, only in his second year at work. I told him just the thought was enough, but he insisted. He said, "I owe you a lot, Mom. I've gotten used to work and I've got more time now. Don't worry about me." Since high school, he has always expressed gratitude and thanked me for everything. Every time, I've been overwhelmed by how wonderfully he's grown. It seems starting work has given him a renewed sense of gratitude. "You struggled as a single mom, but you always supported me in everything I wanted to try. Thanks to you, I'm living my dream now." To me, it's just what any parent would do. But my son feels he had a very comfortable childhood and wants to express his gratitude. I couldn't refuse after hearing all that. Overcome with emotion, I agreed. And we planned to dine at a restaurant he'd booked and then shop for my birthday present. I looked forward to that day. On the day, I dressed up a bit and went out with my son. We walked to the restaurant, chatting happily, and I felt proud looking at my grown-up son. Raising him on my own was a decision I made. I had help from my parents and siblings, so while it was hard, it wasn't unbearable. He used to be so small, but now he's grown so much, I thought, looking up at my son who was now taller than me. Over time, my son's face had become more mature, and as I noticed the passing days, I felt happiness. But then, I suddenly felt like a bucket of cold water was thrown over me. "Catherine, long time no see." At first, I didn't recognize the voice, but then I realized it was my aged ex-husband. He was with a woman who looked younger than him. From a distance, my ex-husband called out and deliberately approached us. "What do you want?" I didn't want to talk to my ex-husband on this fine day, so I responded coldly. After our divorce, we hadn't communicated at all, so I wondered what he wanted now as I looked at him skeptically. My ex-husband came closer, took a long look at me and my son, and then laughed mockingly. "You still have that sour look on your face," he said. "Is that the kid we had when we divorced? Still taking care of him, huh? Good for you." He assumed our son had some disability and began bragging about his own life without even being asked. He told me he had remarried soon after our divorce and now had a daughter in college. He bragged about how well his daughter was doing in a prestigious university. Convinced that our son was not doing well, he started boasting about his new wife too. His new wife was 10 years younger than him, they quickly had a child, and he was now earning more than before. Our marriage was a complete waste of time, he boasted. It seemed he'd approached me just to mock me. Though I was infuriated, I wanted to leave, saying I had plans. But he wasn't done yet. Ignoring my evident annoyance, he began to mock my son. Is he disabled and a lot of trouble? Can he even get a job? Looks like you'll have no one to help you in your old age. Tough break. I can handle insults about me, but not about my son. I raised my hand to hit him, but my son stopped me. Mom, it's not worth our time dealing with him. Let's go. My son, staying calm, held me back and disregarded my ex-husband, showing concern for me. There was a time when my son was curious about his father. I had promised to tell him about our divorce once he was an adult, and I had. It seemed he had decided to consider himself as not knowing his father. What's with that attitude towards your dad? My mother raised me. I don't have a father, my son retorted. Perhaps angered by this, my ex-husband, who hadn't even paid child support, tried to lecture my son. My son looked at him coldly and shot back. Are you unemployed? You really are a fool, just like you look. But my ex-husband just laughed mockingly. I work as a diplomat, my son said calmly. When my son mentioned the university he'd attended, my ex-husband looked shocked. It was a university known to be very challenging, and even those unfamiliar with it would recognize its prestige. Being a diplomat requires significant education and, moreover, a good character. It's a challenging profession to get into, even if you aspire to it. That's why he aimed for prestigious universities, which would provide a better chance of becoming a diplomat. My ex-husband clearly hadn't expected this, and his face twisted in disbelief. Seeing my calm son and my stunned ex-husband, I finally felt at peace. I was reassured that divorcing him had been the right decision. If I had stayed with him for the sake of our son, I was sure it would have negatively impacted our son's upbringing. I noticed the woman with my ex-husband seemed very surprised. Not so much by my son's achievements, but more by his appearance. When my ex-husband began hurling abuses again, she quickly stopped him. Hey, what's up? You shouldn't talk to this person like that. Let's get going. Reprimanding her ex-husband, who didn't seem to understand, the woman dragged him away. I wondered if she knew the son from her demeanor. When I asked my son, he claimed he didn't know her. Not understanding, I decided to let go of the matter concerning my ex-husband and enjoy the moment. Afterwards, I celebrated with my son and thoroughly enjoyed the day. I thought I wouldn't have any dealings with my ex-husband anymore, but a week later, he called. I hadn't changed my phone number when I switched to a smartphone. I had intended to keep my ex-husband's number for a while and delete it later, but with parenting and work, I had completely forgotten. So, when the call came, I was surprised and considered not picking it up since we had nothing to talk about. But, out of curiosity, wondering why he'd call now after all this time, I decided to answer. When I picked up, the first thing he blurted out made no sense. Let me talk to John. This situation is bad. He sounded desperate, almost pleading. I was taken aback. Just a week ago, he had insulted John, and now this? What's this all about now? I assumed he had selfish intentions, but I wanted to know why. Turns out, after he had spoken ill of us a week ago, things started going south for him both at work and in his married life. Apparently, his new wife has 2 brothers. One of them is a diplomat, akin to a department head in a company. This brother had taken a liking to a newcomer at work, and that turned out to be John. Soon after joining, John had resolved a dispute between a foreigner and an American, and apparently did a great job. Furthermore, besides English, John could speak 3 other languages, and his zeal for learning made him the focus of attention as a promising newcomer. This led to him getting more opportunities to talk with his superiors, and it seemed they got along well. Now they even hang out on weekends. I had heard about this from John. He seemed to be enjoying his job already, and I remember feeling relieved. But I had no idea that this superior was related to my ex-husband's new wife. I was shocked. And this brother seemed to be quite fond of John. He apparently often discussed with his family about having John marry his niece, who was close in age to John. This niece happened to be my ex-husband's daughter, and the brother wished, if he had a daughter of his own, she would marry someone like John. Moreover, not just because of his skills, but because of his good character, the extended family, despite never meeting him, seemed to think favorably of John. Apparently, out of consideration, thinking a father might not be thrilled about potential son-in-law discussions, my ex-husband was kept in the dark. So, his new wife knew John, and she had shared about the incident a week ago with her brothers. The relatives were quite angry with my ex-husband. That woman ratted me out. She even started talking about divorcing me. Even if they're divorced, when someone verbally abuses their own child and ex-wife like that, any sensible person would naturally want to divorce them. I guess it's inevitable for Bob's wife to think he'd verbally abuse her and their daughter too. Furthermore, my ex-husband, Bob, was about to retire, and he had a good job opportunity recommended by his relatives. But now, it seems like he might lose that opportunity. On the other hand, the brother of his current wife seems to be a big-shot CEO. Bob had gotten a job through his connections and apparently made money easily. Thanks to that, he never had to worry about work or money. But because of this incident, it seems people no longer trust him, and he might not be able to get the job he was planning on. I was planning on having a carefree retirement. Can you ask our son, John, to help me out? When a father's in trouble, his child should help, right? Bob, who never really cared about our child and didn't even pay child support, just wanted to use him for his own convenience. I was beyond angry at Bob's audacity. I was simply astounded. You agreed not to see our child in exchange for not paying child support when we divorced. John doesn't owe you anything, so you better figure things out yourself. I don't want to live a lonely life in my old age. Why don't we get back together? John would be happy living with his father again, right? Come on, let's live together. I firmly declined, but Bob kept spouting nonsense. After all those hurtful things he'd said, I was just appalled at what he was suggesting now. The very thought of living with Bob again made my skin crawl. There's no way. You made your bed, now lie in it. Didn't you say you didn't want the responsibility? I firmly declined and ignored Bob's pleading voice, hanging up the phone. Without delay, I deleted Bob's contact information. Since then, John and I have been living our lives smoothly. When I mentioned Bob's call to John, he told me that his relationship with his boss was still good. John was surprised to find out just how much his boss wanted him as a son-in-law. I don't know the details, but I've heard that Bob's been kicked out by his second wife and is now struggling. Bob, who said he wanted to enjoy a lively retirement, seems to be living a tough life alone, jobless, and with little savings. His second wife was apparently wealthy, so he probably relied on her and didn't save much for his retirement. I had stopped caring about Bob, but remembering the things he did in the past, it felt like karma. As for me, life isn't exactly as I'd pictured when I married Bob, but I can say I'm truly happy now. Nowadays, I'm careful about my health so I don't become a burden to John, who's working hard, and I enjoy my peaceful life living alone. And I'm looking forward to the day John introduces me to my future daughter-in-law and I get to meet my grandkids. Every day, I live my life happily and energetically.